for your interest. But I'd like to recognize Mayor Doug Essick from the Fredonia Mayor, Mayor Willie Rosas, who is the mayor of Dunkirk. I'd like to recognize trustees Nicole Syracuse, Jim Linden, and Michelle Twitchell. I'd also like to recognize City Councilwoman Natalie Luzkowiak. And I'd like to recognize we have two special people. Well, we have a number. Everyone's special. Sorry.
Everyone gets a prize.
Everyone, yeah. We also have Lucas Natali, who is the owner of our new Fredonia Cycle Shop, and who also is one of the organizers of the Fredonia Slow Roll. And he will be available after the meeting to talk to people if people have questions about that. And then also Jacob Bodway, who is the director of Chautauqua Trails and one of the he is a facilitator for the Greenways program, which is one of the things that will be mentioned tonight. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to introduce Jack Dagostino, who is the editor of 4 newspapers, including the Jamestown Post-Journal and also our Dunkirk Observer. At the conclusion of everyone speaking, we will be taking questions. If you have questions from your index card or you think of something else, just give them to an usher and they will bring them up, because we have Amy Lauer and Jill Casey who are sorting questions. Thank you very much, Jack. Take it away.
Thank you, Susan, and I appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. 20 years ago, village leaders knew they had a problem. Crossing Main Street downtown, even at the crosswalks, was a major hazard for pedestrians. Part of the trouble then, many may remember, was the street had 4 lanes. It almost invited higher speeds. To slow vehicles, village officials placed pedestrian crossing signs at 3 locations in the center of the road. All 3, especially the one at Park Place, took a beating for motorists. Today, Main Street has been reduced to 3 lanes, but it can still be a treacherous venture for those who walk it. How do we make things safer? How do we begin to calm traffic to make this community more friendly to pedestrians and cyclists? This evening, we have 4 people who will address an issue that has been embraced by other towns and cities across the nation. Joining us tonight to address this situation are Justin Booth. He is an expert in creating livable streets and vibrant communities. He is the founder and director of Western New York's bicycle advocacy organization, Go Bike, and began a regional association of Go Buffalo Niagara. James Kuzo, from the State Department of Transportation, Region 5, he is the planning and local project liaison who serves on the agency's Bike Pedestrian Complete Streets Working Group. In addition, he serves as a DOT Region 5 liaison to the Western New York Regional Economic Development Council. With him is Dwight D. Mateer. He is also with the Department of Transportation, and he is resident program manager. Kevin Kearns is with us of Central Connection. He is a special assistant to the president for strategic initiatives at SUNY Fredonia. He has served in a number of various administrative capacities, including vice president for advancement, engagement, and economic development. Finally, we have Rebecca Wurster at the end table to my right. She is the Special Projects Coordinator with the Department of Planning and Development and the Chautauqua County Partnership for Growth. She assists in the management of projects while composing grants to improve local municipalities, private businesses, and community organizations. To all on our panel, your time and commitment to this event is greatly appreciated. And we'll begin with our presentations, and the first one to present is Justin Booth.
Thank you very much. Let's see, can everyone hear me? These are always so low. So again, my name is Justin Booth, Executive Director at Go Bike. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about why we do this work. And I think what's important to note is, how we've designed our environments to really focus on how we move cars from point A to point B and how that has had such a negative impact upon our health. in our communities and our quality of life. What's important to note, though, is that, there's obviously some trips that we all need a vehicle for. I often get the question if I actually own a car, and I do. And being a tall person, you'll probably laugh that I drive a Mini Cooper, but it was the only one I actually fit in, surprisingly. But even when we think about our trips that are less than 1 mile, 72% of those are done in a vehicle by ourselves. And why are people choosing not to walk or to bike for those 1 mile trips? It's often because our streets are not safe for us to do so. Next slide. We get funding through the New York State Department of Health to address this issue because the Surgeon General recommends 30 minutes of physical activity a day just to maintain our health. That 1 mile walk to the grocery store takes about 15 minutes. Walking home is another 15 minutes. There's your easy 30 minutes of physical activity. But we know that the cost of not getting that activity is significant. The latest information from the state comptroller back in 2011 identifies that childhood obesity is costing New York State $327 million a year in indirect and direct medical costs, and that number jumps up to $11.8 billion when we start talking about adults. And so when we hear that we cannot afford to implement complete streets and make our communities more walkable and bikeable, we can't afford not to. Next slide. We also know this is an equity issue. The cost of owning and operating a vehicle, according to AAA, is over $9,000 a year. For someone who's low income, that's a significant portion of their income or their family income. And if we are forcing people in our community to drive on a consistent basis just so they can get to their jobs, just so they can have their daily do their daily errands, so they can get to school or other aspects of their life, we're doing our communities a disservice. Many communities are looking at how we encourage more people to walk and bike. And Portland, Oregon is considered one of the most bicycle-friendly cities in the United States. And they studied, that they drive in that metro area 4 miles less than other metro areas across the United States, and have been able to demonstrate that over $1 billion going back into their local economy because people have more money in their pockets to spend in the local economy. Next slide. We also know that our personal transportation choices has a significant impact on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we're emitting, and climate change is an important issue that we need to address for ourselves today, for our children, for our grandchildren in the future. And our personal transportation choices has a significant impact on transportation greenhouse gas emissions. And if we have 72% of individuals driving for that 1 mile trip, we can start to see how that starts adding up pretty quickly. So next slide. One of the key things that we are working on with the Greater Buffalo-Niagara Regional Transportation Council, it's the Metropolitan Planning Organization here in Niagara County, is our trails and greenways. The highways that we can connect our communities to for people to walk, to bike, to use electric scooters, to skateboard, to go for walks with their spouses, away, physically separated from traffic, feeling safe and comfortable in their communities. This map shows a vision of what that could look like, connecting Buffalo across the entire state with the Empire State Trail, connecting through the Southern Tier Trail down to Cattaraugus County, connecting down into Chautauqua County. And the opportunity, we are working with partners in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Environmental Coalition. They have been coordinating the Circuit Trails, which is a collection of trails in Pennsylvania. So there's already a connection from Pittsburgh down to Washington, D.C., and we are working with them to see how we bring those trails up into New York State and connect Western Pennsylvania to Western New York. Next slide. So one of the key programs that Go Bike does is our Healthy Streets Initiative. Next slide. Our focus with our Healthy Streets Initiative is to really look at how we can implement safe, complete streets today and not wait for the millions of dollars in infrastructure funds to make it permanent. We look at our streets, whether they're corridors, whether they're rail, or whether they're utility, and see what the opportunities are. Many times when we take a look at our streets, in many of our older communities especially, our streets are overbuilt for the number of vehicles that are on the roadways. It's great to hear that a road diet happened here in Fredonia, removing removing a lane of traffic, going from 4 lanes down to 3 lanes. That is based on the number of vehicles traveling along that corridor. Also looking at the width of the lanes and identifying how we can narrow the travel lanes, reduce the number of lanes, and using the existing space between the curbs to provide more space for other people to traverse along that corridor without negatively impacting vehicles going through that corridor. Next slide. We do this work by really focusing on community engagement. There are lots of different strategies, lots of new guidance that's out there, a lot of communities testing new treatments, but it really comes down to making sure that we center the experiences of people living in their communities to address the concerns that they have. Each community is different, each has a different set of circumstances, each has different contexts that we're working with, and so making sure that we hear from many folks in terms of, are people speeding down your street? Are they stopping at the stop signs? Are they following the traffic laws? And if not, how can we apply different design treatments in our street to begin to exact the right behaviors from the people that are using our corridors, whether you're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a driver, so that everyone is safe in our streets? We know that enforcement works, but we'll never have enough enforcement on our streets to make sure that everyone is doing the right thing. And so design exacts the behaviors we want to see, and we want to use design to hopefully begin to eliminate the need for enforcement for traffic. So next slide. When we work with communities, we really like to think about developing an action plan, not just specifically on projects and how are we redesigning our streets, but also looking at our policies and programs. It's great to hear that Fredonia is hosting a slow roll. Getting more people out there riding more often is a great way to introduce more people into this healthy behavior. But also, sometimes we've seen many communities that the ability to create complete streets is challenging. We don't have the policies in place to allow it to happen, and oftentimes we have to push back. I'm sorry, my friends at DOT, but sometimes we have to push back on DOT to get what we want to see, because oftentimes the focus is on how quickly we're moving cars from point A to point B, and not about how we're safely moving people throughout our community. And so, do we have a complete streets policy in place? Does our zoning code focus on making sure that the street wall is built to the curb and not set back so a pedestrian has to cross a parking lot to get to the building? There's lots of ways that we can design our communities, not only looking at the public infrastructure, but also the private infrastructure to support people's ability to walk and bike more often. Next slide. When we work with communities, we look at different design options. This is 2 designs that we did for a project in the city of Lackawanna. We often took a look. They had a traffic study in place that showed that they had too wide of a street for the amount of traffic that was there, and the vehicles were going fast, they're loud, and particularly during the pandemic, it was really inhibiting businesses to have outdoor dining, because you couldn't sit next to a person next to you and hear them talk while the tractor trailers are going by. And so we gave them a number of different design options that we were able to go out there and actually implement. But we focused on, an important aspect of this is making sure that it can be maintained long term. And so the bottom design option, using parked cars to protect the cyclists as opposed to cyclists to protect parked cars, was off the table because they didn't have the maintenance equipment to clear those bike lanes, to sweep those bike lanes. So we did the 2-way protected bike lane, which you can see in the top one, which was wide enough that their existing maintenance equipment could go down and clear the debris, clear the snow, and make sure that we are thinking not only about how we design our streets better, but also how are we maintaining those streets once they're built. Next slide. We like to do temporary installations, and temporary could be for a weekend, it could be for an evening, it could be for an entire season. But many of the things that we are talking about can be easily done by adding more paint to the street. When we repave a street, how do we reallocate that space with between those curbs? The ability for us to go out there and install a temporary treatment and use it as a way to do public engagement. Some people have not seen these treatments before. They haven't been to New York City and seen some of the new infrastructure they've been installing in some of these other places. And so how do we test these out? How do we make sure that it works not just on paper, but actually on the ground, and work with the community to tweak that design in real time. If we design a corridor where there's bump outs at the intersections, we want to make sure the school buses can still easily get through. So maybe we have to pull the curb radius back a little bit, but by using temporary measures, we can do that tomorrow and not have to spend millions of dollars. When we go out there and redo an intersection for a temporary treatment, it costs $2,000. If a municipality is going to go out there and do it, it usually costs roughly around $140,000. So let's get our design right the first time, use these temporary treatments to lead us to that longer term investment. Next slide. And of course, we find it incredibly important to assess what happens. Collecting data beforehand, collecting data during the implementation, collecting data afterwards. The project we did on Ridge Road, we found out in the city of Lackawanna that we had a 275% increase in the number of people cycling on that street. And of course, it was not just the increase in cyclists, it was more families, it was more kids, it was more women. We don't want any more mammals, the middle-aged men in Lycra, right? We know that they're going to be out there, people like me are going to be out there always riding on the street. We want to make it safe for everybody else. We know that just a traditional bike lane or shared lane marking, you're going to get 1 to 8% of the population using that. But if you do a protected facility, separated from traffic, either with a car or a divider or a trail or a greenway, you're going to attract up to 90% of the population using that corridor. And so we want to make sure that we are investing in our infrastructure that supports the majority of our population. So next slide. And that is it. There's my contact information. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Rebecca Wurster from Chautauqua County.
There we go. Hello, everyone. As Jack said, my name's Rebecca Wurster. I'm the planning coordinator for the county and the Partnership for Economic Growth. Thank you today to legislators Susan Parker and Bob Scuddard and the Village of Fredonia for putting on this forum. It's a really important topic, especially in the planning world. So, next slide, please. Today I'm going to first talk about what a complete street is, and then I will get into what we're doing at the county level in regards to complete streets. So what are complete streets? Complete streets are designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. And they're really meant to create safe, comfortable, and convenient corridors and routes throughout our communities. Next slide, please. So why plan for complete streets? There's a lot of different reasons, but these are some of the top 5 reasons. If you could go to the next slide. One of those includes why we plan for complete streets is to improve greater transportation options. Over 1/3 of Americans do not drive. We have an old or aging population, and then the younger population that travels to school by walking or biking, those also without cars, and those that prefer to walk or bicycle to their destinations. Next slide. We also plan for complete streets to improve our health benefits throughout our community. Active living is a huge one. As Justin discussed, the risk of obesity and associated health problems can be reduced in walkable and bikeable communities. We also want to create communities that allow for aging in place for our older population. So increasing the quality of life for seniors to allow them to stay in their homes later in life. Being able to walk to the grocery store as a senior, walk to your doctor's appointment, really improves that quality of life. And if you have a complete street, it's easier to do that. Safer routes to school is also very important, making streets safer for children, as well as ADA accessibility and universal design for all abilities. Next slide. Community and economic development benefits are huge for complete streets. They really leverage complete streets to attract people to Chautauqua County. Quality of place is a strong factor in location preference among job seekers and businesses. Creating walkable, bikeable main streets and downtown corridors really contribute to the success of local businesses, especially with several main streets that are in our jurisdictions across the county and the state. And then creating walkable neighborhoods that can improve communities and link residential areas to commercial areas. In addition to this, connecting our trails, such as our Greenway trails throughout Chautauqua County, and recreation and linking them to our complete streets offers greater opportunities for people to come to the area and enjoy our recreation. And a great kind of example of the community and economic benefits that I've seen in the past is I look at Niagara Street in the city of Buffalo, the complete street work that's been done over the years in phases along Niagara has really transformed that corridor, bringing in breweries, mixed-use development, housing, different businesses and restaurants. So it's really exciting to see. Next slide. So designing for complete streets. When designing complete streets, it's important to consider universal design standards that really make streets less confusing, allow traffic to flow at a safe yet efficient speed, provide more space for pedestrians and cyclists, ensure that streets are easy to navigate and cross for all. There also is the benefit of traffic calming techniques such as narrowed streets to slow traffic and shorten crosswalks, and curb extensions and raised crosswalks to create safe areas for pedestrians. Next slide. Complete streets in practice. It's not required for every street and road, and it really depends on your community's needs and environment, such as a rural community versus a urban community. It can be implemented as opportunities arise, such as new road construction projects, maintenance and rebuilding projects, milling, repaving, and striping the roadways. And as always, it's really important during the planning process that you engage with municipalities and the public to gain input and request the right, to require the right results and hear from your community. Next slide. So complete streets implementation, a little bit about the Complete Streets policy. New York State's Complete Streets Act was adopted in 2011. And over the years, a lot of our municipalities in Chautauqua County have adopted complete streets policies. Specifically, Chautauqua County adopted one in 2015. Next slide. In 2015, the county established a complete streets program in addition to the policy. That program requires the following: that the Department of Public Facilities shall consider all modes of transportation and travel and design projects. In the planning stage of each project, the Department of Public Facilities shall evaluate the feasibility of implementing complete streets design features, such as sidewalks, paved shoulders, lane striping, bicycle lanes, shared road signs, crossroads, crosswalks and road diets, and different traffic calming measures. And then for each project, the Department of Public Facilities shall assess the needs of users according to rural, suburban, and urban context. Next slide. The Department of Public Facilities is really encouraged to work with different stakeholders and responsible agencies when looking at specific projects. These agencies can include the Department of Health and Human Services, the Division of Planning and Economic Development, the Department of Public Facilities, Office for the Aging, our county sheriff's departments, the Emergency Management Services, the County Health Network, and other area agencies, as well as the obvious municipalities where the project is located and the appropriate boards and personnel associated with those projects. Next slide. So now I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing now at the county. In 2021, the County Executive Wendell reestablished the county's Complete Streets Working Group. And we're an internal working group that includes the Department of Health, Planning, and Public Facilities. And specifically, necessary work has been done to kind of develop an outline strategy for complete streets. We meet quarterly and on a project-by-project basis. This group has really established that outline strategy where we look at state, county, and local roads, and we identify those for possible projects, advocacy programs, and technical assistance. We also think it's really important for education and advocacy for complete streets policies. So we're working on currently reaching out to municipalities that haven't yet adopted a complete street policy and kind of educating them on the reasons why they should adopt that policy. And a few that recently stood out include the Village of Mayville, Village of Bemis Point, Town of Chautauqua, Town of Mina, and Town of Westfield. Next slide. So how do we improve complete streets implementation? Well, like I said, we recently developed an outline strategy for moving forward. And in 2022, the county budgeted approximately $650,000 for complete streets oriented projects and spending. $650,000 seems like a lot of money, but as Justin said, you know, $100,000 doesn't go a long way to implement just one of those complete streets pieces. So we're really trying to be strategic in how we spend that money. So funding is going to go towards specific projects located on county roads, and the projects are going to be prioritized by looking at the DPF scheduled projects that are kind of on the docket from year to year. As far as like milling and paving and different pieces like that. We're also looking at if the project's located near schools or located along a downtown or Main Street corridor. We're also looking at the environmental benefits that a project could include and the health and active living benefits of improving a street as a complete street, such as improving access for senior walkability and improving the walkability for a low-income population or children walking in the area. It also looks at if a community has already adopted a complete streets policy, that just gives us the benefit knowing that that community would like to see a complete streets project. Obviously, we still need to talk to that municipality, but that's the benefit of knowing that there's a complete streets policy in place already. And then any planning work that identifies complete streets projects, like a comprehensive plan or a master plan, any type of planning work that's been done already. Next slide. So this year we're trying to gear up for some of those projects, either to be implemented in this year or in 2023. We're really finalizing some possible projects, still putting pen to paper and identifying those. But we've kind of broken it up into state projects, county projects, local projects, and policy work. At the state level, it's really about advocacy for projects. So we recently met with some of James's colleagues and discussed some projects that were happening in the city of Jamestown that are currently in the planning phase, specifically East 4th Street at the intersection of East 4th Street and Church Street, which then turns into East 2nd Street and basically follows East 2nd Street all the way down to the Faulkner line. Along that corridor, you have the Jamestown High School, you have JCC, you have a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of people walking in that area. So we want to advocate for the DOT to work with us on some complete streets pieces within that corridor. And then also kind of getting some ideas on their radar. They're not really in the planning stages yet for Route 394 in the village of Mayville and the town of Chautauqua, but there's a lot of planning efforts going on in regards to the Barcelona to Chautauqua Institution Trail that actually is a segment along 394, as well as the village of Mayville doing some master planning for Lakeside Park, and there are some complete streets components that have been identified as possible projects out of that master planning effort. So working hand in hand and in partnership with the DOT on that. And then also county projects, like I mentioned, we're working with the Department of Public Facilities to include complete streets features on possible upcoming paving projects. A couple in this area that were identified were Water Street in the village of Fredonia. That's kind of geared up as a paving project, and we'd like to reach out and work with the village of Fredonia on a possible pilot project to really demonstrate some of the great complete streets features that could be implemented there. Highly trafficked area, a lot of college students walking that corridor, a lot of businesses, a lot of traffic going by, so we think that would be a good fit. As well as Maple Avenue in the village of Cassadaga. That corridor is highly trafficked. It's a stretch that goes near Cassadaga Lakes and is really trafficked by a lot of pedestrians and bicyclists in the area. And then lastly, looking at local projects and how we can offer technical assistance to municipalities for complete streets projects, possibly linking them up with Justin and his team, trying to help find funding for these smaller size projects and helping in any way that we can be of help for technical assistance. And then lastly, I mentioned this already, but kind of at the policy level, advocating for our municipalities to adopt that complete streets policy. Again, it's really important that communities have that. If they want to move forward with the complete streets project, they might be looking for grant funding, and if they were putting in a grant to New York State, they could point to the fact that they have a complete streets policy and that that policy is backed by their community, and that might give them kind of an upper hand in getting some grant funding to actually implement that project. And that's currently what we're working on.
Our third speaker is from SUNY Fredonia, representing Central Connections, Kevin Kearns.
Good evening, everyone. We hope not to take you away from basketball if you're a March Madness junkie. Next slide, please. So the Central Connection, I think, is an early example of a complete streets project that was a collaborative effort between the city of Dunkirk, the village, and the university. And really, it was a recognition of the current state of funding and opportunities, specifically a recognition that funding in a very restricted local area is less likely than in a region or across a region by cooperating entities. And so part of the rationale for Central Connection was to cooperate, to compete for funding more readily, and frankly, to improve quality of life and be a pebble in the water to do these other things that have been talked about here today. So we began in 2016 with a consolidated funding application to the state, which was funded. And based on that, the University of Buffalo's Regional Institute came in and helped us with a planning project. They interviewed constituents and essentially developed a roadmap for moving forward for improving the corridor along Central Avenue from the heart of Fredonia down to the waterfront in Dunkirk. Next slide, please. So essentially, the idea is that by cooperating, we'll get a lot further. And so this developed into a formal collaboration between the university and our neighbors in the village and the city of Dunkirk. And as a result, allowed us to do combined planning as opposed to isolated planning. Next slide, please. One of the things that was important is to include raising awareness of the unique assets of the area, enhancing tourism, building lasting partnerships among the entities. And the bottom line was to try and co-brand the area as opposed to competing for resources individually. By co-branding, we felt that we had a better opportunity to draw tourists, to draw private funding, and to increase the quality of life in the area. Next slide, please. So the bottom line with all of this, as has been said, is that how do you identify funding opportunities to support central connection projects and explore areas of cooperation? This led to a memorandum of understanding so that individual members would communicate. You know, if the village is doing something and not talking to Dunkirk, if the university is doing something that impacts the village and vice versa, and we're not at the same table, then it's a problem not just for funding, but also for the end result. And it also sets up bad blood on occasion. So there was an agreement through an MOU to collaborate and support one another in the pursuit of funding that would help everyone and help improve the central corridor along Central Avenue from the lakefront down to the village. The other important piece is, when possible, to avoid direct competition. So it's okay for Fredonia, obviously the university, or Dunkirk to have their individual projects. But if we all communicate about them and if we don't compete with one another as much as possible, we're all going to be better off. So again, this is an early example, I think, of a Complete Streets initiative that was successful along the central connection. The idea was to build excitement among residents, increase private sector investment, raise awareness of the unique assets of each of the participants, and to build a strong and lasting partnership. The bottom line, I think, was that it was a successful early effort. I think now of the County Partnership for Economic Development and all they've done, it really was a pebble that was an early attempt to build the kind of collaboration that has been formalized at the county level. So in the roadmap developed out of the formal plan presented by the University of Buffalo, a number of projects were identified, and these have been funded and are now completed, including work on the Dunkirk Pier, Central Avenue signage, renovation of Barker Commons just outside. And the funding that was received for those projects really was seeded in the Central Connection roadmap. And so the bottom line is that it was an early guide to help us develop cooperation, enhance quality of life, and hopefully improve the economic vitality of the area. And I think it also presented an opportunity to look at a process. They recommended, and it's now common practice, to pick a district for a project, to define a project carefully, to build consensus, to identify funding and apply for funding, hopefully together whenever possible. So that was our first pebble in the water. Thank you.
Our final presentation will be done by Jim Kuzo of the State Department of Transportation.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear all the presenters, and it was nice to hear our agency kind of involved in a little bit of future planning for some of these projects as well. Kevin, I agree with you that it's much better to have a regional type project than it is to have a local project, because you do compete for the same pool of funds that are out there. But to give you my kind of little spiel as to why I'm here, basically because of Susan. You have a good, county official who actively reached out to the New York State Department of Transportation and Region 5 And staff ultimately reached out to the bike ped coordinator to see how we could help a little bit here to introduce some of what we do and how we can bring some of what we do as an agency back into the community, whether it's in brain power with engineering, whether it's in design and scoping, whether it's in actual transportation funds or in other areas. The easiest way for me to kind of describe how you get to the bike ped coordinator in the NISDOT Region 5 is to tell you a little bit about who we are. The New York State Department of Transportation has basically 10 regions throughout the state, not including the New York City Department of Transportation and their metropolitan planning organization. We're Region 5. I'm not exactly sure how Western New York ended up Region 5 because we're at the end of the state, but we're Region 5 in that number of 10 regions. And basically we cover Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Erie, and Niagara counties. Erie and Niagara counties are a part of what they call a metropolitan planning organization that's also overseen with administrative funding through the Greater Buffalo Regional Niagara Transportation Council. In your area here for Chautauqua and Cattaraugus, you become a part of any projects that we're working on with state roads, structures, or bridges. You become part of what's called the Regional Capital Program. And you know, I should go to the next slide now before we kind of bore you with the statistics of who we are. But there's 150 munis in Region 5. There's 872 state bridges. There's 3,800 miles of state roads, and you have a population in the 4 counties of 1.3 million. So we're probably the second biggest region, I think, in the state of New York. So we cover a fairly large area. Our area is a little bit different than the regional Western New York Economic Development Council area, which includes Allegheny County. Region 5 does not include Allegheny County, so I just wanted to make sure you know that. To get to the bike ped coordinator, you have to go through what's called our planning and program management group. As a bike ped coordinator, I work inside the planning and program management group in the Buffalo office in Region 5. Basically, what the planning program group does is oversees a 5-year capital program. Similar to, I think, what Rebecca was kind of explaining as to how they're beginning to try to come up with a complete street plan with both local, county, and state roads. You're looking at your program and looking at your priorities. We do exactly the same. And the priorities usually lie with the roads that are the most in need. And I think that's how you're looking at that on a county level as well. So our capital program includes projects located on both the state and local highway system. They're projects that are funded with either state or federal transportation dollars. The mission of the Planning and Programming Department is recommending these projects for a 5-year capital program. It is fluid. Projects in year 1 are usually projects that are going to go out for active bid and construction. Projects that are in year 5 are more considered active, but considered projects on the program, possibly candidate projects. Once you get to the 5 years out, they can fluctuate from time to time. All of the projects have to go through what's called the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, the STIP and the TIP. For rural counties, it would be just the Transportation Improvement Program. And we have teams of people in planning and programming, including myself, who works on both the Consolidated Highway Improvement Program and the Local Highway Inventory, along with the TAP CMAQ program, which I'll tell you about shortly. But also in the planning and programming staff, there's teams that work on pavement programs to make sure that our asset management group is keeping the roads and the bridges and the culverts, small and big, up to date. We have a person who works on all issues that have to do with the Seneca Nation. We have a rail unit in the planning and programming unit. There's also a modeling team that works with the MPO on kind of creating controlled schematics and formulas for what best design or what best technique should be used on streets. And then, you know, I work as well with reaching out into the community. Planning and programming and the bike ped coordinator goes out to meet with folks such as the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus Transportation Demand Management Team. I'm a member representing the region director on the Niagara River Greenway Commission. So I attend those meetings to find out what type of projects that we should be aware of on a transportation level with the Niagara River Greenway. And we work as a liaison to the Western New York Regional Economic Development Council for any funding that may be taking place through downtown revitalization initiatives, possibly consolidated funding applications, like the one that was received recently for Barker Commons. So we're kind of in tune and aware of these projects that are taking place that may or may not be on and off both local and state roads. So that's some of what we do as a planning and programming unit. Next slide. I won't belabor too much on complete streets. Rebecca, I think, did a really good job, and Justin as well, talking about complete streets. Basically, New York State established a law for complete streets in 2011, as Rebecca mentioned. And that law includes any roadway that is planned and designed and considered safe, convenient access, has to have all of the users of the roadway. We have to consider mobility for all the users. So that's not just a car, not just a truck, a bus. That includes people on a bike. It includes people walking as well. And it's something that has been taking place since the time I've been at the New York State Department of Transportation for about 9 years or so. Complete streets and bike ped policy and bike ped coordination is becoming more and more involved. It takes up more than what's supposed to be 20% of my time in a given day or a week, but it's getting busier. And complete streets, as you see policies throughout the 4-county region taking place, very important to have a policy, very important to contact us so we can find out what your needs are and try to do what the state wants us to do, and that is to design features that include sidewalks and lane striping and paved shoulders and good curbing and safe streets for your community. We're out there. There's money available for it. We reach out to you from time to time to make sure you're aware of that funding. Next slide. One of the main components of funding that comes through the Federal Highway Administration to the different states across the country and to New York State is called TAP-CMAQ, or Transportation Alternative Program funding. A lot of communities in Region 5 have applied for this funding, have taken advantage of this funding, and have done a lot of good projects because of the Transportation Alternative Program. It helps communities deliver transformative projects, projects that enhance mobility, modernize any walking and biking options that you have, and gives you a more vibrant street which you want to create for your community, which also creates more economic development, as it was mentioned with City of Buffalo, Rebecca, and Niagara Street. I think Ohio Street was another good example of that, where in the City of Buffalo, New York State Department of Transportation worked to design a new Ohio Street which showed a bike connection from the end of the city through the corridor that has all of the old mills right into the waterfront. And now there's been more businesses along that stretch of community as well that have taken advantage, and apartment complexes and units of housing that have taken advantage of wanting to live by a more walkable, more bike-friendly area that's just a few miles to the downtown city core. So TAP-CMAQ is basically a biannual program that Region 5 has to compete with all the other regions in New York State for the pool of money that's out there. The last time TAP-CMAQ program was initiated was at the middle toward the end of 2021, last year. We received 21 applications. In the round in 2018, we received over 30 applications. Basically, communities are competing for funding of a minimum of $250,000 to a maximum of $5 million. The program is an 80-20 match where 80% of the money is coming from the Transportation Alternative Program grant that you're applying for, getting approved and awarded. The other 20% comes from the local municipality or some funding that the local municipality gets either from a foundation privately or from some other entity. The next slides will show you some projects that have taken place through the Transportation Alternatives Program. This project here is a $2 million project that took place in the city of Jamestown. The city applied for this particular TAP project. It was basically 2 pedestrian bridges, and this is a very unique type of transportation alternative project. You don't see these often from time to time. But this one got approved basically because it connected 2 sides of a community, and the way it connected the community was also to different parks, different activities, cultural centers that were taking place in Jamestown and the National Comedy Center. There were reasons why this got funded. And the project is completed in 2019, I believe. The project was also awarded a Project of the Year by the New York State Institute of Transportation Engineers. So it was clearly a worthwhile project deserving of funding. Next slide. This is one you're probably all aware of that was awarded in the last round, basically in the city of Dunkirk. And it sounds like a lot of what you're trying to do and want to do here. It's called the Lakeshore Complete Street Project. It's a $1.8 million project, which I think is now completed their design and is actually getting ready to be constructed, I think, within the next year or this construction season. And it's a good project. It's implementation of a complete street along Route 5. It has some green infrastructure involved. It has some bike lanes, median, and curbing. City of Dunkirk also received some smart growth funds as well to enhance the pier and waterfront area, and we thought that this project complemented well with some of those project applications and awards, and that's how this one was funded. Hopefully it'll be a good project for the community. And obviously it has some bike lanes on both sides of the street and new sidewalk as well. Next slide. This is the town of Amherst in Erie County, called Casey Road. The people in that community and the town fathers applied for this project because the road did not meet what they considered were their bike and pedestrian needs. This project incorporated new sidewalk along with a multi-use path. It was a $1.5 million project. It's completed, and in this last round of transportation alternative projects, actually the town of Amherst has applied for Casey Road Phase 2, which I didn't know they were going to have a Phase 2 when they were awarded a Phase 1. Looks like you have a bird or something in here. Anyway, the next slide is a recent highway improvement project in Jamestown on New York 430 and 60 along Washington Street. This is a kind of an example of a project that was basically started off as a pavement resurfacing project, ultimately ended up as a road diet. It ended up with bike lanes. It ended up being a more expensive project, but it's hopefully going to do more for the community. I believe it's going to be going out for construction with a completion date of 2023. And it's a good example of if you get to us early about needs that you have on state roads, maybe we can find and seek more funding for you. It doesn't always have to be through a grant. And we are trying to do this more and more with different communities out there. And if you contact me, it'll circulate throughout the NISDOT region for sure. So that's kind of why we're here tonight. Next slide. This slide just gives you a little bit of an idea of the different projects that have already been completed, whether they're road projects or resurfacing projects in the areas here in Fredonia and Dunkirk. And I can explain more of those later, but some are pedestrian safety projects, some are intersection improvement projects, some are highway resurfacing projects. So we have been out here, we are out here, and we'll continue to be out here in the future. Next slide. This is just a little bit of information. The Federal Highway Administration is a great source, great resource for any kind of information for education and information you want for complete streets and bike pedestrian amenities and transportation alternative programs. That just gives you a quick idea of all the different links that are out there for the public, free, and it's a real learning curve, but it's a lot of knowledge-based information out there that's available through NISDOT or through the FHWA. That's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we get to the questions, don't miss the feature presentation of Batman. So our first question, A lot of people are concerned that complete streets aren't manageable in a winter climate. Could someone discuss this?
I'd be happy to. So I ride my bicycle year-round, and I think my first mantra is always, it's never bad weather, it's just bad attire. But you can look at many communities, either across the United States or across the globe, that have invested in safe, complete streets, but also invest in maintaining them throughout all seasons. Many communities, Minneapolis, Minnesota is a good example. They'll go out there and they'll plow their trails and greenways. They'll plow their bike lanes. You look at places like Copenhagen and places in the Netherlands, they will certainly go out there and oftentimes plow their bike lanes before they plow their travel lanes. And so it's really not about, the weather. It's really about making sure that it's safe all seasons and accommodating people in all those seasons so they can get to where they need to go. We do spend a lot of money and resources to maintain our roadways and making sure that they're free of snow and clear so there's no issues for traveling. But we don't often do a good job of maintaining our sidewalks. I know many municipalities pass the responsibility and onus of that responsibility off to the adjacent property owner. And so how do we make sure that we put all modes of travel at the same level for all residents in our community? So, it's not about, bad weather. It's just really, the strategies out there. That it does cost resources, and it's a, how do we prioritize making sure that we do this for everyone in our community?
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's also about just working with your DPW department and really educating and understanding their challenges and how you can resolve those by working together on what that might look like.
I know on a DOT end, one of the concerns we hear a lot about, especially the transportation alternative program projects, are, but the locality has to spend the money to maintain all these projects once they're constructed. And Justin will tell you, I've been one of those trying to do my best behind the scenes championing what either state or federal governments or how we can kind of coalesce to come up with assistance for the municipalities to maintain these on a long-term basis. It is the responsibility of the municipality, but they have lots of other responsibilities, just like NISDOT does. So, there are options available. We've talked about them. I've actually kind of put some policy proposals forth to the main office. They're good at getting the feedback that's necessary, and I think you'll see more in the future assistance for maintenance of these projects.
Our next question. Are there effective community education programs to make communities aware and safe?
Aware of what?
Aware of, I would say, the complete streets issue.
I guess I could start. There is a lot of resources out there. The New York State Department of Health has funding that has over 25 communities across the state looking at working on complete streets, doing education programs, talking about these projects. There's funding through the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee about traffic safety, how to properly walk in the street, ride your bike in the street, what drivers are responsible for doing. There's constant, educational opportunities, through a lot of professional organizations, the American Planning Association. There is the National Association of City Traffic Officials. There's a lot of different groups that are really working on trying to not only educate citizens and residents about safe, complete streets, but also to train our engineers and train our planners and our other municipal officials so they can take advantage of these opportunities as well. Their Smart Growth America does have a, I forget what they call it, but it's basically they invite elected leaders from each community to participate in their program to learn more about complete streets and how other communities are implementing complete streets there to bring back to their own communities. So there is a tremendous amount of resources for people from all sectors to learn about complete streets, how to implement complete streets, how to be more safe on our roadways. And there's, again, a ton of resources online. Federal Highway Administration has a great design guidebook that really combines a lot of some of the best guidance out there, designing multimodal networks that pulls in the Institute for Traffic Engineers, the American Association of Highway Traffic Officials, NACTA, which I mentioned earlier, and others to say, this is what all the different design guidance says, this is the flexibility that you have in your design practices, and this is the recommendations of how you can actually create safe, complete streets in your communities. So there's a ton of resources out there, and I will speak for everyone that's on the table here and say that we, at least for myself, but that we are all also here to be resources for you and your communities.
We'll go to the next question. Are there any examples of different communities working together to unify a common and shared street and apply complete street principles?
Well, my little spiel about Central Connection, I think, was just that, actually. And it actually had different challenges than more localized projects. But I think the real key to that effort was to combine the unique assets of the village, the university, and the city, and to make those known as a package, and to really improve the thoroughfare from one end to the other. So I think that's a good example, a fairly small example, but that effort, I think, led to, you know, $2.5 million funding, at least indirectly, for the village, and another 2.5 in Dunkirk. So I think it was quite a successful initial start. That effort was in part sidelined by COVID, as many other things were, but we're here tonight to try and get momentum and keep going.
Yeah, and in addition, the 394 route within the town of Chautauqua and the village of Fredonia, I think, is also a good example of two communities that are going to have to work together on top of the county working with the communities, as well as going after possible state funding to implement the project. So that's a great example of a possible complete streets project that we're currently working on.
Yeah, I can give, Justin will know this example. It's in the city of Niagara Falls, North Tonawanda, town of Wheatfield, with assistance from both the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the GBNRTC, NISDOT, Go Bike, you name it, the Niagara River Greenway Commission, and the Ralph Wilson Foundation. We were able to take a project that was only in design through, and only partially funded through a grant from the National Scenic Byway Corridors, a state DOT grant that was for the town of Wheatfield, and basically combine it with a new application, a new CMAQ application, basically, in the city of Niagara Falls for a regionally connected trail that would go from certain streets in the city of Niagara Falls right through to River Road, town of Wheatfield, into North Tonawanda, and connect with the regional shoreline trail. It was complex. It still is a complex project that's taking a little bit longer than we hoped in design, but it is a project that's going to be great for the community. And the 20% local match for that funding came from the Ralph Wilson Foundation on behalf of the city of Niagara Falls. That project initially had a grant awarded price tag of around $5 million. So these things can happen. It just takes a little bit of creativity, a little communication, and a lot of people kind of on board wanting the same thing for your community.
Next set of questions is directed for the DOT, and it concerns Main Street and Route 20. First question is, can there be consistent speed zones through the village and starting at the roundabout through downtown?
I'm not sure I'm the expert in the Route 20 route, but Dwight Mateer is our resident program manager. Maybe he can give you some thoughts on that. I've taken a walk through the region while I was here, and And some of, I think, the initial concerns that Susan relayed to me, in an email communication, I can understand after, walking it a little bit. So, we will meet afterwards, we'll talk, we'll, see what, NISDOT can and can't do within the capital program, and then come up with some other suggestions as well. But, Dwight, you have any?
Yeah, one of the things we could do is we could initiate a speed study through the corridor to assess the speeds that are there now and see if they're properly warranted as signed. I think this is a really good question, and it's something that I'll bring forward to look into.
Next question for the DOT. There are 3 lanes, but not all bike lanes all the way for that stretch of road from the roundabout through downtown. Can they be added to increase safety, the bike lanes?
One of my roles in the DOT is to balance the needs of available funding to program construction projects that address issues and provide value. We're looking at the paving the corridor at the current time, but we haven't determined the need to relocate the curbs. I looked at it myself, and I see that the travel lane's pretty well accommodated. There's a wide center turn lane. As I scoped the project to pave through there, I had already planned to have the designers look at how to restripe it to accommodate bicycles.
I just want to add to that, and I think it's important for residents to be your own advocates. Dwight and Jim are great, but they are members of a team within a larger agency, and of course, having community support for these types of things is incredibly valuable. So, when we look at projects, our first thing is, what is the traffic volume on the street? Is it, so first, like, if with the volume on the street, can you reduce the number of lanes? But beyond that, you can, depending on the type of traffic on the street, the guidance says that you can move the travel lanes down to 10 feet wide. In the city of Buffalo, typically we will get the city to move travel lanes down to about 11 feet wide, some rare occasions 10 feet wide, particularly to accommodate on truck routes. But oftentimes we see travel lanes that are 12 to 15 feet wide. And so sometimes the best opportunity to do a complete street is during a maintenance project, during a repaving project, and the opportunity to simply put the paint down differently. And this is where it's incredibly important to coordinate and communicate, with the Department of Transportation, with the county, making sure you have your policies and plans in place. So when these projects do come up, there's an opportunity during these maintenance projects to advocate for, can we reduce, and are we willing to reduce the lane width in order to, add an extra foot or two so we can accommodate a bike lane. I will also say that the state's complete streets policy excluded maintenance projects, and so it's not a guarantee. It's only for construction and new construction projects. There is, and I'll share this with you all, there is a statewide package of bills called the Crash Victims' Rights and Safety Act, there is a group of organizations like ours across New York State looking at this package of bills. One closes that loophole in the complete streets policy. One actually increases the amount of state funding from 80% to 87.5% if a community implements a complete streets project, reducing the local match. There's a law in there about providing safe passage. There's a law about allowing municipalities to reduce or set their own speed limits and set it down to 20 miles per hour. So I would highly encourage you all to take a look at that, the Crash Victims' Rights and Safety Act. Look at the package of bills that are there and reach out to your state legislatures if it's something that you support, because a lot of these bills will provide a lot of support for local communities to make their streets safer.
I would just, thank you, Justin, and I would just add one thing. If you have some concerns on a state road in your municipality, probably the first thing to do is to address those concerns first to your local officials. You can go directly, I guess, to a state agency, but we're going to go right back, most likely, without speaking for anybody, right back to the local elected officials to see if this concern is real and to see what they think about this concern or others that they may have. So, and then have those local officials come to us in either a meeting, a letter, some type of concerted, they call it action letters in our agency, a concerted effort to really lay out what these concerns are and what you would like to see from the agency. And that's kind of like the very first step in the process of moving forward on a concern. It's not something that's going to happen overnight unless it's a real safety concern, real safety concerns of a nature of accidents will get addressed quicker. But concerns of safety, they will get addressed, and they do get reviewed and looked at all the time. I think the other thing, Justin, regarding the complete street policy in New York State, I think we as a region see that little issue with the section that's called maintenance on the project. And the statewide, I serve now on the statewide complete street advisory committee to look at all of this stuff, and they are taking a look at the complete street checklist form and the process of possibly revising it for the future. So we could talk afterwards about that.
For Chautauqua County and Rebecca Wurster, are there any county roads that are candidates for roundabouts?
Possibly. That will go on my list for the next thing we talk about at our Complete Streets meeting. But right now, like I said, we're at the very beginning stages of identifying projects. So that could be a potential if we identify a road that could have a roundabout. Yep.
For the panel, how do you get motorists to stop for pedestrians in designated crosswalk areas? During the presentation, little was said about public transportation and complete streets. How does complete streets help public transportation?
Everyone's looking at me. Good question. I mean, the first piece, I think, is really designing our streets for pedestrians and people first. We design our streets for vehicles to move quickly through them. And if you look at many of our intersections, if there's a lot of turning movements, we'll add that extra turning lane so cars can make a quick right-hand turn, or we have that, the center turning lane so they can get out of the way of other traffic. It's because the main metric that we use on designing our roadways is vehicle level of service, which is our subjective measure of how much congestion we are willing to tolerate at an intersection during peak travel time. And even Federal Highway would say that it shouldn't be our main metric. It should be one metric that we look at. It is often held to the highest regard when our traffic engineers are looking at our streets. And so one of the things that we've seen in only one state so far, they've eliminated level of service, is the state of California. They've eliminated level of service, and they're focused on reducing vehicle miles traveled. Now, this was done primarily for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It was an executive order by the governor and passed the legislature. But this change in the metric focuses on moving people through an intersection. The level of service model looks at a car with one person in it the same as a bus with 30 people in it. And so we want to focus on, from our take, from Go Bike's take, when we design our streets, it should be about people first and not how quickly we can move cars. So I think that's the first big piece, is how do we set the policies and the processes in place to redesign our streets to focus on people. That will begin to allow us to utilize designs that can really begin to slow cars down. The only place in Western New York that I've been to where cars actually yield for me in the crosswalk has been in the village of Hamburg. Anyone who's been to the village of Hamburg in Erie County, that was a state route 62 that was redone, and I was down there taking pictures because actually Rebecca had a picture of that in her slides. It is one of the few streets where I actually walked into the crosswalk just to get a picture of the roundabout that's used for presentations, where cars in all directions stopped for me when I wasn't even going to cross the street, so then I felt I had to. So that is, so the design really does a huge amount to affecting behavior. But again, we need to write our processes and policies, so that is what is the standard for all our projects, as opposed to thinking about bicycles and pedestrians secondhand. So that was the first part of the question. I forgot what the second one was.
I would go back to the community. I mean, the agency, like an agency like the New York State Department of Transportation may have grants available, and you may be able to do some complete street work. We may be able to put up pedestrian safety action plan, nice fluorescent signs for your community, but the cars are still going to whiz right by. I think at that point, you need some local enforcement. It doesn't necessarily have to be your local police department, but at some point you need some local enforcement, because I would probably guarantee you, if you have someone sitting there stopping people on a regular basis and being charged a hefty fine for going through that crosswalk, it's going to happen less and less and less at some point. So I think an agency like ours can make it safer, but then there has to be some enforcement that follows up with that.
Yeah, the second part of that question was about transit in complete streets. And I think you got to, when I think about transit and complete streets, is how are you accessing transit? And oftentimes we think about that first mile, last mile. How are you getting to the transit stop, and how are you getting to your destination from there? Federal Transit Administration creates a 1-mile walk shed around a transit location and a 3-mile bike shed around a transit location, where they allow their resources to be used, because they recognize the fact that for people to access public transit, they need to be able to walk or bike there. And so designing our streets around our transit hubs to be walkable and bikeable actually improves access in the transit, improves convenience to using transit, and increases ridership. The other piece that we're seeing in transit, and of course, particularly during COVID, many cities, instead of adding bike lanes, for instance, they pulled out travel lanes and they've added dedicated bus lanes. So they can increase the frequency of the buses along that corridor, so they can have more people moving in there and keep them separated and safe during COVID. So it's been, how do we increase frequency of the buses? How do we make sure that they're not sitting in traffic? I've also seen many communities, instead of having the buses pull off to the side, they actually extend the sidewalk to where the buses would stop for loading and unloading. This makes all the other cars at that stop have to wait for that bus. So then it becomes less convenient to drive, because you're going just as fast as the transit service. And so it encourages more people to use public transit, because public transit is going to be more accessible and more convenient for them. And so we got to, again, are we designing our streets for transit, for people, or are we designing it to move cars? And those are the choices that we made the choice for many, many years to move cars as quickly as we can. And now many of our communities are passing these complete streets policies, going back to the thought of how do we move people instead, and doing it more effectively and efficiently.
Okay, we'll move to the next question. When starting programs, advocates often begin with the idea of picking low-hanging fruit. Besides this form, what would each of you identify as 2 or 3 of the lowest hanging fruit to further implement the Complete Streets program?
I guess in terms, Dwight, you probably know better than me, but striping, signage, crosswalks, making sure all of your countdown timers are working, they're up to date with the latest standards and specifications, all of your ADA standards, signalization, traffic signalization on a particular route if it's a very busy street. There's a lot of different ways, you can come up with.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Striping and signage are probably your first best bets for low-hanging fruit projects. And again, the county's looking at county streets to fund, but ultimately, if there are smaller scale projects that municipalities are interested in, I'd highly suggest reaching out to our departments, and we could be that technical assistance or help find some additional funding for those smaller scale projects.
I think the other side to the same coin is safety. Around the university, we have some notorious crosswalks that everyone knows about, and I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I'll underline paint. Paint is incredibly effective and inexpensive way to start making some of these improvements. But for cyclists, I'll specifically say bike racks. This is where we actually started in the city of Buffalo. You're not going to get anyone to ride their bicycle unless they have a place to lock their bicycle at their destination.
Has the DOT considered bike lanes on Route 60 to connect the North and South County?
Would that be from the roundabout north?
From Dunkirk to Jamestown?
Currently in our five-year program, there isn't a specific project for bike lanes, but one of the concepts that I'm assessing right now is that strip of Route 60 between the lake and the roundabout for pedestrians, because right now it has a paved, asphalt paved path, and I personally don't think that it is adequate, and I think that the complete streets concepts would apply well through there.
How safe are electric scooters on our roads, especially when they share the bike lanes and riding on narrow streets?
Many cities have been implementing these electric scooter share programs to mixed results, primarily because they're all over the place. You know, whether they're on the sidewalks, they're in the bike lanes, you know, they don't have a docking station oftentimes, so they're just left in the middle of the sidewalk. So I think there's some challenges, and you know, there are Shared Mobility is an organization that we work with a lot. They actually are the operators of the Ready Bike Share program in the city of Buffalo. They do electric bike libraries, but they're kind of our local experts on, you know, e-bikes, electric scooters, bike sharing programs, car sharing programs. You know, they would be great people to bring in to speak to you more about that. But I think the number one thing is, on my side, is, you know, electric scooters probably go just as fast as a bicycle. I think their top speed is roughly 20 miles per hour. The average speed of a cyclist is about 12.5 miles an hour. Electric bike obviously can go to 20 miles an hour too. But if your pavement is in rough shape, you know, the simple seams in the asphalt, you know, that opened up over the winter time aren't going to affect a vehicle, but they're certainly going to affect a cyclist, and they're going to affect an electric scooter, someone riding one of those. And so, you know, again, making sure we have safe facilities in place for those users, and bike lanes are probably the most effective way to do that for electric scooters, would be the way to go.
I can only say on a regional level, it's not really something that we deal with. I do notice that when I'm attending statewide meetings, that it is an issue on a statewide level, and it seems to me, just on a kind of a looking level, that the laws are either a little ambiguous or a little bit all over the map when it comes to e-bikes. So it creates some confusion, I think, on a statewide level too. But that's just my personal opinion, not something on behalf of the agency. But I know as an agency, we don't usually dabble or see anything in terms of e-bikes and dealing with it directly or funding of it.
So we're going to wrap this up with the final question. How would you, on this panel, recommend people get change started to improve walking and biking? For example, adding sidewalks, adding bike lanes, traffic signals, or crosswalks. Who wants to begin?
I'll start because I do this all the time. We work with a school, and I love this example because it's a way, when you start in one location, it spreads like wildfire. You know, we worked with a parents group and a principal at an elementary school, Niagara Street Elementary School in the city of Niagara Falls. The parents just wanted a safe crossing to get across the street to get their kids to school. We held the Complete Streets workshop. You know, the mayor was there, some of the council members. We talked about what some of the challenges were, what some of the treatments were. We came back with them with an action plan that identified, you know, some prioritized locations where people are primarily walking, you know, and basically just suggested, like, let's put down some crosswalks and some bike lanes, you know, at least around the school, so we can start slowing down speeds and create those safe crossings. We partnered with the art class at the school, and that was actually my first slide. The kids came out with their art classes and created these wonderful public art crosswalks. And we did 3 of them at the school. Well, then other art teachers saw this, and other teachers saw this from other schools, and within a month, we had done public art crosswalks at every single elementary school in the city of Niagara Falls. And so I would say, first start organizing your community, identify some of those easy, quick, projects, and get out there and start painting your streets.
Yeah, and I jump on that by saying, make it fun. I think the Village of Fredonia and the City of Dunkirk have done a great job with starting that slow roll, but making it kind of a common thing, maybe once a month or throughout the good weather season, and really getting input from the community, getting the community out there to kind of point out this intersection could be improved, and you hear a lot from the community when you're doing something fun like that. So I definitely suggest keeping that going.
There was a sign-in when you came in, and so I really think that this forum is to generate interest and get volunteers to step up and help identify what the problems are. The reality is that there are limited funds, that if you let administrators and elected officials choose, don't be surprised if it's near their house. But all kidding aside, I think it's important to volunteer, to give your input, because I think if you study the big picture, there won't be kind of the same thing we talked about, all these competing intersections at this level. So what are the priorities? What does the community feel? Try and build consensus and develop that list of projects, and then I think you'll have a lot of success.
Sounds like you have a very active county right now with their Complete Street group already active and working daily and then on a quarterly basis. If you don't have a representative on that group from Fredonia, I think you should probably consider one, because that would be a good first step for you. And of course, NISDOT's available for anyone, when there is a safety concern or a complete street need, or if you're anticipating putting together something in terms of an application for an award, we'll help you every step of the way.
Super. Well, once again, thanks to County Legislators Susan Parker, Bob Scudder, Village of Fredonia. Thank you to our panel, starting far right, Jim Kuzo, Dwight Mateer, Justin Booth, Kevin Kearns, and Rebecca Wurster. So lots of good information, lots of good starting points. And most importantly, on this evening, we survived the bad. So have a great evening, and thanks for your participation.
Thank you.